1.3 of Being No One, the Self-Model Theory of Subjectivity. Overview, the architecture of this book. In this book, you'll find 12 new conceptual instruments, 2 new theoretical entities, a double set of neurophenomenological case studies, and some heuristic metaphors. Perhaps most important, I introduce 2 new theoretical entities: the phenomenal self-model and the phenomenal model of the intentionality relation. I contend that these entities are distinct theoretical entities and argue that they may form the decisive conceptual link between first-person and third-person approaches to the conscious mind. I also claim that they are distinct in terms of relating to clearly isolable and correlated phenomena on the phenomenological, the representationalist, the functionalist, and the neurobiological levels of description. A PSM, phenomenal self-model, and PMIR, phenomenal model of the intentionality relation, are something to be found by empirical research in the mind sciences. Second, these 2 hypothetical entities are helpful on the level of conceptual analysis as well. They may form the decisive conceptual link between consciousness research in the humanities and consciousness research in the sciences. For philosophy of mind, they serve as important conceptual links between personal and subpersonal levels of description for conscious systems. Apart from the necessary normative context, what makes a non-person a person is a very special sort of PSM plus a PMR. You become a person by possessing a transparent self-model plus a conscious model of the quote-unquote arrow of intentionality, linking you to the world. In addition, the 2 new hypothetical entities can further support us in developing an extended representationalist framework for intersubjectivity and social cognition, because they allow us to understand the second-person perspective, the consciously experienced you as well. Third, if we want to get a better grasp on the transition from biological to cultural evolution, both entities are likely to constitute important aspects of the actual linkage to be described. And finally, it will also prove to be fruitful in developing a meta-theoretical account about what actually it is that theories in the neuro and cognitive sciences are talking about. As can be seen from what has just been said, Chapter 6 is in some ways the most important part of this book, because it explains what a phenomenal self-model and the phenomenal model of the intentionality relation actually are. However, to create some common ground, I will start by introducing some simple tools in the following chapter. In Chapter 2, I explain what mental representation is, as opposed to mental simulation and mental presentation, and what it means that all 3 phenomena can exist in an unconscious and a conscious form. This chapter is mirrored in Chapter 5, which reapplies the new conceptual distinctions to self-representation, self-simulation, and self-presentation. As Chapter 2 is of a more introductory character, it is also much longer than Chapter 5. Chapter 3 investigates more closely the transition from unconscious information processing in the brain to full-blown phenomenal experience. There, you'll find a set of 10 constraints, which any mental representation has to satisfy if its content wants to count as conscious content. However, as you'll discover, some of these constraints are domain-specific, and not all of them form strictly necessary conditions. There are degrees of phenomenality. Neither consciousness nor self-consciousness is an all-or-nothing affair. In addition, these constraints are also multi-level constraints, in that they make an attempt to take the first-person phenomenology, the representational and functional architecture, and the neuroscience of consciousness seriously at the same time. Chapter 3 is mirrored in the first part of Chapter 6, namely in applying these constraints to the special case of self-consciousness. Chapter 4 presents a brief set of neurophenomenological case studies, We take a closer look at interesting clinical phenomena such as agnosia, neglect, blindsight, and hallucinations, and also at ordinary forms of what I call deviant phenomenal models of reality. For example, dreams. One function of these case studies is to show us what is not necessary in the deep structure of conscious experience and to prevent us from drawing false conclusions on the conceptual level. They also function as harsh reality test for the philosophical instruments developed in both of the preceding chapters. Chapter 4 is mirrored again in Chapter 7. Chapter 7 expands on Chapter 4 because self-consciousness and the first-person perspective constitute the true thematic focus of this book. Our reality test has to be much more extensive in its second half and harsher too. In particular, we have to see if not only our new set of concepts and constraints, but the two central theoretical entities, the phenomenal self-model and the PMIR, as introduced in Chapter 6, actually have a chance to survive any such reality test. Finally, Chapter 8 makes an attempt to draw the different threads together in a more general and illustrative manner. It also offers many answers to the questions listed in the preceding section of this chapter, and some brief concluding remarks about potential future directions. This book was written for readers, and I have tried to make it as easy to use as possible. Different readers will take different paths. If you have no time to read the entire book, skip to Chapter 8 and work your way back where necessary. If you are a philosopher interested in neurophenomenological case studies that challenge traditional theories of conscious mind, go to Chapters 4 and 7. If you're an empirical scientist or a philosopher mainly interested in constraints on the notion of conscious representation, go to Chapter 3 and then on to Sections 6.1 and 6.2 to learn more about the specific application of these constraints in developing a theory of the phenomenal self. If your focus is on the heart of the theory, on the two new theoretical entities called the PSM and the PMIR, then you should simply try to read Chapter 6 first. But if you're interested in learning why qualia don't exist, what the actual items in our basic conceptual toolkit are, and why all of this is primarily a representationalist theory of consciousness, the phenomenal self, and the first-person perspective, then simply turn this page and go on.